order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee and the Metropolitan Council for May 6th, 2024. We have a quorum of the committee. I'm the chair, Councilmember Robert Lilligren. Committee members, I would note Director Barajas has asked if we could reorder the information items and move the third one, the American Indian Advisory Council update, to info item number 1, and then move the other 2 down. Cool with everyone? So with no objection.
For taking pity on Allison and not making her sit around.
Yes. Those were almost word for word what Lisa just said to me. So thank you for your understanding, Councilmember Wolf. Cool. So with that change, we'll consider the agenda approved. Cool. Next on the agenda is approval of the April 15th, 2024 Community Development Committee meetings. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Councilmember Wolf. Any discussion, additions, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. 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 Opposed? That carries. Committee members, we have one consent item. It's the City of Corcoran's Hope Ministries Land Use Change Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Is there a motion to approve?
I enthusiastically move to approve.
Great, an enthusiastic motion from Councilmember Johnson and a second from Councilmember Wolf.
It sounded enthusiastic to me, too.
Yeah, very cool. This must, I'm sure there's a story behind that, Councilmember Johnson. I would love to.
Just my district.
I love it. Good. All in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Welcome, Councilmember Dokar. Now moving on to the non-consent items. The first is item 2024, or the only non-consent business item, 2024-118. Let's adopt the 2024 Community Development Committee Work Plan, and Director Barajas will present on this. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of the Community Development Division. I'm just returning to you tonight, or this afternoon, I should say, with a full plan for your committee's consideration for adoption. At our last Community Development Committee meeting, I presented a draft version of this work plan. You've since done a little bit of tweaking and refinement just on organization of content within the written portions of this plan, and then you will, but nothing substantial. The main items are still the main items. And then you'll see attached on pages 4 and 5, a visual representation of the schedule. Generally, you'll see a lot of tentatively scheduled items, and especially items where we think they'll happen in the second half of the year, or items that are green, in a light green, that actually happen kind of on an as-needed basis as we get applications, as we get amendment proposals, et cetera. And then you'll see, especially at the bottom of page 4, how we have tentatively a lot of time on your calendars through the second, third, and into the fourth quarter for Imagine 2050 discussions as well. So happy to take any questions, but otherwise I think our discussion at the last committee meeting is represented within this plan.
Thank you, Director Barajas. Questions, discussion? I appreciate the process. I appreciate the product that we're looking at. It's very helpful. I actually kind of like the list, the narrative. It's just really easy to use, easy to see, but yeah. Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
I would just second everything that you said. I think it's so well laid out, easy for policymakers to follow along, and still has flexibility to get what we need done when we need to get it done. So thank you, Lisa, to you and your team. And without objection, I'd move to adopt.
Thanks. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter. Discussion, Councilmember Lindquist.
That was Councilmember Vento.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Vento. I knew it came from over there somewhere.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair. I was just thinking back about the February conversation we had about the livable community grants, and the motion that was passed at the full council about making sure that it was reflected on our work plan for the year, and that let's see, I'm just looking at the motion that was passed back in February, that add to the 2024 committee work plan a council member engaged process for reviewing the LCA program to address the equity scoring criteria, graphic distribution of awards, and barriers to participation in the program. And I'd see that we have it, the Livable Communities Act annual fund distribution plan is first and foremost on the bulleted item under livable communities. And I'm wondering if, I imagine that's what you were thinking about this, that's where that would fit. I'm wondering if it should be a little bit more spelled out to reflect what was passed at the full council meeting in February. Thoughts on that?
Thanks, Councilmember
To
Lindstrom.
you and to the committee as a whole,
Sure.
I guess.
Maybe I'll turn to Director Barajas and, response to Councilmember Lindstrom, and then we can turn to committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Lindstrom, you'll see actually at the bottom of the livable communities list is a bullet that says LCA program evaluation in alignment with Imagine 2050. And that is the one that's intended to capture that work. And then you'll see on the schedule that we have it tentatively scheduled in over the third quarter and into the fourth quarter as well. And that's because we're partly still in process of scheduling timeframe with Metro Cities around when those workshops will be held and when we'll bring those back to the council. So that's why you see that tentative. But but our intent is to have those workshops in the summertime, have further committee discussion here at CDC, and then into fourth quarter as we normally do when we prepare for the 2025 fund distribution plan.
Very good.
Further comments, Councilmember Lindstrom, or turn
No,
to the
thank
committee? Okay, thank you. Councilmember Vento.
For cities and townships that aren't part of metro cities, how do we fill that gap?
Mr.
Director
Chair,
Barajas,
thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Vento. We certainly are always looking very closely at who are participants in Metro Cities and who are not. And especially if there's in that Venn diagram of not participants and such. But some of the stuff my staff have been doing outside of the Metro Cities process has been conducting interviews on their own with one-on-one conversations with local unit of government staff from across the region. Are, for the most part, most of the cities in this region are parts of Metro Cities, but you're right, there are some that are not. We'll be sure that we take a close look at that in townships, obviously, as well.
Councilmember Vento.
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Mr. Chair, again, Lisa, can you just repeat how the motion of February, the council member Lindstrom brought up, how that will be very specific to the motion of suburban communities and the council members outside of metro cities?
Director Barajas.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, most suburban communities that are both LCA participants and not participants are part of Metro Cities. It's actually where we hear a lot about LCA is through Metro Cities and that organization. But we will take a closer look on membership just to be sure that we aren't missing anybody in that process and ensure that we are reaching out as part of separate individual engagement that we are doing as well, one-on-one conversations and focus groups as a part of that to be sure they're covered.
Okay. Appreciate using Metro Cities. They are a great platform and a great convener. And so and again, I appreciate your work on this, and I know there's got to be a strategy to get our numbers up for LCA too, so having these conversations is really, I think, fundamental to that. I just want to, offer up, and I think it was part of the discussion, at least I'll speak for myself, but, I'm willing to help convene groups, around my district or adjacent districts, outside of Metro Cities, because not everybody can get to Metro Cities, and Metro Cities does convene both staff and electeds, but I'm trying to figure out how we get the electeds maybe more involved outside of staff, because, as you know, they're not always on the same page. So, I'm hoping it gets to the crux of, where we took a moment a few months ago on funding, but if we don't fix that, then we're in trouble moving forward this year too.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate Councilmember Lindstrom on the discussion here. And I'm sure staff and Director Barajas here that this is very of high interest to council members in this committee, what that level of involvement looks like. And so I look forward to that engagement as we go forward. Lisa, did you want to say something? You're like, okay, all right. So just note that. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Just very quickly, you know this already, but just a friendly reminder to run what the plan is. I think by everybody would be appreciated by myself and likely just to incorporate that we're getting all the communities and to take up the Council Member Johnson's suggestion to
hold the convening and everything else, just to make sure we're all on the same page going into it.
Thank you, Councilmember Christian. And to be transparent about it, right? And
Totally.
for me, it's helpful if you can hold something and say, here's what we are doing, and here's what we did, you know. Thanks. Further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Congratulations, we have a work plan.
Thank you.
And we will move into our information items, and for those who weren't sure, we've reordered them. We're gonna take item 3 as item 1, and then move the other 2 items down. So our first information item will be the American Indian Advisory Council update. We had a law update, a brief one, at a recent committee of the whole meeting. And so Allison and Angela are here to update us a little more. So welcome, Ms. Waukau, Ms. Torres.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and committee members. You know me well. I'll ask Allison to introduce herself. I know she always likes to include her parents in that.
Allison Waukau, I'm Menominee Navajo. My clans are Tatanasani and Awasa. And I always like to acknowledge my parents, Mary Alice Sosi and Lawrence Waukau. And I am the new, going on 6 months next Monday, I believe, as the new tribal liaison and Native Relations Coordinator.
Congrats.
Thanks.
And thank you, committee members. We're here just to give an update of the American Indian Advisory Council and the meetings that we've been having, the conversations and stories that we've heard, and the process a little bit for the committee. I always like to ground us in the work that the council has already accomplished. The council's value and regional goal both include equity. The regional goal stating our region is equitable and inclusive. Racial inequities and injustices experienced by historically marginalized communities have been eliminated, and every person feels welcome, included, and empowered. The council endorsed that language, that final language, in January of this year. And this is part of the Regional Development Guide, and the effort is meant to inform all of that policy direction, which I think we will be able to do. Another slide, just to really be clear as to the approach that staff have taken, is really in response to the direction that the council in various meetings, whether those are committee of the whole meetings, the Regional Development Guide Working Group meetings, CDC and others, has really provided very clear direction throughout the Regional Development Guide that equity should be at the center of both the process and the policy development. And so really centering community voices. We have heard in multiple occasions to be bold, to be ambitious, and that this council in particular is very supportive of positive change. We like to think that we serve all people of this region, and I think that we can do a better job of that by really doing the things that the council has directed us to do in centering equity in our work. Allison and I have talked with you a couple of different times. We're tag teaming this a little bit. Allison is much better at talking about the stories that we have heard, and so we'll get into that in a moment. But I wanted to just reiterate, we shared a little bit about this at the Committee of the Whole, but the process that we're doing is really an inside-outside circle where community speaks first. You'll see that in some of the agenda items that we'll talk about in the meeting as well. Community talks amongst themselves first. We might have some big broad questions or a topic, and we stop there. And then we just listen to community. Council staff is on the outside of that circle where we are just listening and taking notes. We do provide transcribed notes for advisory council participants and summaries of the discussion for others so that individuals aren't necessarily identified, but they can feel free to speak openly. So that's the process of co-creation that we've adopted in every one of the meetings that we've had thus far. I'll go through, Allison and I will both kind of talk on each of the slides coming up, just really about I'll talk about the topic at hand, and Allison will talk about what the committee has shared. The first meeting, which was March 25th, and by the way, we are meeting all across the region, so we're traveling around quite a bit. We just brought the topic of land acknowledgements and wanted to hear what people's experiences with land acknowledgements were. You can see on the slide and in the memo the content of the slide, but I will just ask Allison to share her recollections, and Councilmember Lilligren was at that kickoff meeting as well, about their experiences with land acknowledgements. I will be honest and just interject real quick, it wasn't positive. And so we shifted immediately. And so Allison can talk more about that.
Thank you, Angela. So with our first meeting, it was brought to our attention that the advisory council members had been a part of land acknowledgements previously, and the issue that they had was they would work on the research and bring the recommendations, and then they would not be adopted by the organization or the school. And so they've just been really disappointed with their participation in the past. And they made an exception for the Met Council, which I think is amazing, and we're very lucky to have them. And so we want to take this seriously and one of the suggestions that was brought to our attention was that they would like to have land commitments instead of land acknowledgements. So adding that to really any land acknowledgement that is successful has action items alongside it. And so that's one of the things that we would show is our action items would be our commitments. And this is really being created with information alongside our divisions and with our advisory council. It's been really great to see this transformation and these conversations. One of the things that was brought up at our first meeting was that they would like to see more education led by Metropolitan Council to show that it is Dakota land. And so being innovative, such as the bus and working with our arts and really seeing how we can educate our residents and our staff. Another thing was that there are Dakota that are still like exiled, right? So knowing that there are 11 tribes within Minnesota, but there are so many more that we would include within. And there are, within my first few weeks here, I learned that there was, in the last census, 65,000 within the metro area, 65,000, but he estimated there was about 10,000 missing from that. So approximately 75,000 tribal members are living within the Met Council district, or region, thank you. And so that was one of the things that came up in the first meeting. I have to say it was really beautiful to see how they were not happy with land acknowledgements at the end, but at the end, they were really willing to participate and bring their expertise forward. It was really positive, and I think it really was because of the process that we had, the inner circle, outer circle, right? So giving them the power to really guide our process.
Our second meeting on April 8th really walked through the Met Council's roles and responsibilities. I think it was the only PowerPoint that we will provide to the Advisory Council, but we really walked through the policy operations and kind of institutional responsibilities of the Metropolitan Council, the systems that we have versus policy areas. We did focus on tribal consultation policy, which we do recognize quickly needs to be updated to include the American Indian populations that aren't represented by the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota. The fact that this is a government-to-government relationship really supports calling out the American Indian Advisory Council differently. With a lot of our equity work, we're really trying to reach the most vulnerable communities. Time and time again, the demographics and the statistics show that American Indians are always at the subjected to the worst conditions. And so whether that is income, whether that is being housed or health conditions, the American Indian population suffers in this region. So as a government, we have a responsibility to elevate this separately and differently than other equity work that we do. And so really thinking about how we might incorporate this into regional policy because of that. I'll then maybe ask Allison to share her reflections on some of the.
Sure. With this meeting, it was really to make us grounded in the same, because everyone in our advisory council has some knowledge of Met Council, but not all the same, right? So we wanted to bring just the Metropolitan Council 101 and give them all the same information. And it was really amazing to see how they understood how much we do here in all the different divisions. The thing that was most concentrated on this meeting was the staff and how can we support them in learning about tribal state relations. So that was one thing that was brought up, how to get more staff into attending. We are really lucky to have MnDOT in leading the tribal state relations training, and how can we take advantage of that? And how can we get more staff attending and working alongside MnDOT to possibly have something like reserved numbers that our staff can attend. And then also seeing about how can we increase recruitment and retention of American Indian staff here at Met Council.
I think what you'll see across all of the meetings is a consistent message of education of both staff and the public at large. So the bus may seem like a small step into that, but it actually educates the public very widely about just one aspect of the work that we're talking about. So just wanted to add that.
And it does also bring a certain amount of pride to the American Indian community here. Just to give a quick story, last Wednesday at the American Indian Month kickoff, there were tears when the bus came through. So and that's from people in the crowd that are Dakota and non-Dakota tribal members here. It really has brought folks together, and it was a really nice showcase of Dakota support by having the bus there.
At the third meeting, we invited Emmett Mullen, who is the senior manager of the Regional Parks and Trails System. I'm sure you know Emmett well. And he came and he spoke about the role and responsibilities of the council as it relates to the regional park system. So there are obviously significant lands and significant cultural resources within the regional park system. There are some park implementing agencies that are actively working on different projects as it relates to Indian Mounds, for example, as being one of the things. And so they really understood the connection to policy as it related to these spaces. And I think what you'll hear a lot and see in the summary notes and other things is a focus on access to sacred sites, access to the land for ceremony and for foraging and for medicines and other things. And there was a suggestion about creating a cultural landscape designation in the regional parks policy plan. So they understand, and they were really kind of savvy in asking about what are your levers of influence, what are your levers of control, and we're really trying to amplify that for them as much as possible, thinking creatively to offer suggestions where they're asking for that, but also listening learning and then taking that back to council staff so that we can internalize what it is that they said and find ways to address, whether they mentioned it or not, find ways to address some of the concerns that they were talking about. So it was a great conversation.
It was. I think it was nice that Emmett was willing to come and take some time to speak to the advisory council. With some of our advisory council, they are associated with the parks, but not all. And they were really appreciative of learning more about the parks because this is a huge priority for us as Native peoples, is the land in the parks. And I know some of you may have heard me tell this story already earlier, but one of the things that was brought up to me was we have a really wonderful, responsible, respectful young Dakota man here, and he was looking for somewhere to do his coming of age ceremony when he was younger, and he went to Fort Snelling and asked that he have 4 days within the park, and they said no, they would only give him 2. And he just needed 4 days, not just, but he needed 4 days in the outdoors. He would not have anything with him. And so this is the example where Metropolitan Council can be leaders and supporters of the Native community and allowing access to a park for 4 days. And the youth would show ultimate respect to the land, right? And so this is really showing not only support, but being able to encourage restoration within our youth and in our future. And so this is one thing that was spoken about, is removing those barriers and having access to the parks. Foraging is another really important. We know how to take care of the land and allowing us to do so. And then also, I think we were asked that, and Emmett actually already had experience with this and was already in talks, I believe, with 2 different parks systems within the Metropolitan Council about the cultural landscape designation. And so this is something that is coming about, and if we could really provide leadership to all the park systems and have something that is cohesive, so we don't have all the different systems doing different things on different ways. It would be really appreciative to the Native organizations as well that are being asked individually by each system to help with this. So this would be a wonderful, I think, appreciative if we were to have some advice on the parks policy for this, with everyone involved.
So many small organizations get asked to do the same thing over and over and over again, and the Metropolitan Council has broad reach. 7 counties is a lot of Dakota land, and it could be a consistent message, consistent resources provided to local units of government at the individual level, to the government level, to the county level, to all of the levels. And so really alleviating some of the burden that small organizations really get tasked to do. One of the things that I found really profound is that one of our younger participants, very thoughtful and very measured in how they were speaking, but really thinking about the council's role. So, like his understanding was, so this is a long-range planning organization. So what is the plan, the long-range plan to support my community? And that's really profound when you think about how are we supporting the community itself. And we can do that through our responsibilities as a government and through our responsibilities to develop regional policy. We have broad reach over a really large area, and that's just one of the things that they were speaking about.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, sure.
I'm gonna
A question from
ask a really
Councilmember Johnson.
Question, but it just, so with tribal governments, they're their own governments, is there a role that, instead of, how do I say, it, partnering but actually having them help to write a plan because it's their plan within the region? Like, how cities write their own comp plans and, is there a way, or is that through the consultation process? I mean, I'm just trying to get a better, what I'm trying to do is really bring in
Right.
and invite in as a legitimate, obvious,
Right.
partner government entity, like we have those relationships with others. And I don't know if there's a parity to that, but, a lot is put on your shoulders here. And it'd be great, though, if we could have the voice come to us in the expertise and then incorporate it in a way that is very authentic and nothing lost through translation, through somebody, obviously our staff is very talented, but I'm going to be voting on this, and I just want to make sure it's really, and appreciate that. I mean, this is really the long-range plan, so that just triggered me thinking, I think we think in 4-year cycles a lot, at least in policy world and legislative world and all of that. So just trying to get at, is there a different mechanism that we could work with?
Thank you, Chair and Councilmember Johnson. We actually are working with the tribes, so it will be the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. And we're working on, this week, we are working with presenting at the quarterly meeting at the end of the month, but then also asking their advice on how would they like to proceed with the cultural landscape recognition and designation. And so it really is up to the tribes on how they would like to proceed. And so that's what we would be asking at the end of May. And so you are correct, and both, yes. We will be working alongside the tribes with both Prairie Island and Shakopee most likely leading the way. And so we, along with Maggie Lorenz with Walk on TP, is working with Emmett and his staff and St. Paul Parks as well.
Okay,
Yep. Mhm.
great. And to know whatever scope and duration beyond the immediate, because there's so much work to do. I just hope that this really is impactful. I appreciate the work and the direction on this, that staff is really taking charge on. You're all working together, and I think the time is now. So I just, want to recognize them as a partner, just like all of the other partners who get to write their own comp plans, and then we review it, and hopefully that it's just coming through in the way you're talking about and more, whatever we can do to be supportive.
Ms. Torres, did you want to add something there?
Could I?
Yeah,
Chair?
please.
Chair and committee members, thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Another thing I'd like to add too is that in addition to our work with tribal organizations, we can also support the American Indian organizations, urban organizations as well. So we can do that through regular contracts and subscriptions to their services to help with engagement. That's another avenue. Another thing that we can do is adopt with them, in partnership with them, creation of general guidelines for land management. They know how to take care of the land. They treat land as their relative. There's a lot that we can learn from them, and sharing those kinds of resources, broad guidelines, regional guidelines for many different things, I think can have a really broad reach, especially if they're implemented at all levels and not just at the regional level, but the further down into the individual perspective we can get, the more the land is taken care of in a different way. And so that's another thing that we're looking at, is how other like urban Indian organizations can also be partners with this as well.
And then, Mr. Chair, just one last
Councilmember
question.
Johnson.
And so how do we get this? I'm sure some local governments are doing a better job at it than others, but I just know there's so much more work to be done. And so hopefully, again, we can help so that maybe in comp plans, there can be pieces of this that are showing up and that are sustainable. And I mean sustainable in a way, so 25 years from now will be essentially 2050, and I would bet a lot of us aren't here by then. I mean, some of you might still be here, but, and I just want to make sure that as people come and go to care and keep alive this thing that we're creating today and update it, that there's some sustainability from that standpoint too. So I'm done. I'm taking up
Yeah,
too
no,
much.
I appreciate this conversation, and if I may, I have council members Chambliss and Bento and Q as well, but just to this point, because I think it really is key. And so we talk about, the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, so that's sovereign government to sovereign government, and that's a thing, right? And it's sort of easier for us to understand. But as we talk about Native people who live within the region, who are sovereign people, I mean, this is kind of what I do during my day job, when we talk about data sovereignty, for example, or different kinds of sovereignty that aren't as prescribed as a government-to-government relationship. And so just even having this conversation is moving that along in this incredibly rewarding way. And I have some more I want to say about the group, but just to this point. And so, for example, in the city of Minneapolis since 2003, an organization within the urban Indian community, Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors, has had a memo of understanding established with the city of Minneapolis. This is how we want to be engaged, and these are our expectations of you. Here's your expectations of us. That's been refreshed twice now in the 21 years since it was first passed. And right now, Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors is negotiating with Hennepin County to establish a countywide MOU modeled after the cities. The cities was the first in the nation. And there may be one or two others that have come along, but it's certainly the original in the country. And so to your point of how do you codify this, so when we're not sitting here and supporting this, that continues to live on. So there are tools. And so again, just having this conversation just feels so good, because we are moving this concept of sovereignty along, which it's really thrilling. Councilmember Chambliss and then Councilmember Bento.
Thank you. I'm really glad that we're having an opportunity to review these reflections. There's so much that I don't know about Native American culture and what the needs are. So I'm really happy that we're having this conversation. And when I hear that there has been a recommendation to request to guide their own process or to guide the process, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And I think it's something that should be honored, whether it's for related to land or just general Met Council processes, procedures, priorities. We've got a long way to go, which is why we talk about equity and racial equity. The gap is so huge. It makes sense to me for the request to look at this this particular piece of our regional guide and our regional policies separately, so that we can hone in on what the specific needs are. And then I think it's important to be very sensitive to what are the needs in order to guide independent processes. Do we need to provide specific support or capacity building to ensure success? So this is a start, but I mean, there's so many things that would need to be addressed in order to have a real material impact, even looking at data. Because when we look at the data, we have these rules for what makes the data statistically significant. And because of genocide and some of the things that have happened, we don't have the numbers in many cases to provide the kind of support that we need, and it causes a cultural invisibility that creates a situation where we're not effective. So I think we have to, this is going to help us in many different ways be better at implementing equity, because it's going to cause us to question some of those things that we normally make as status quo. I mean, if we look at a map and we don't see Native American Indians because it's not statistically significant, the numbers, then we've got a problem. How are we going to work within our system and maybe even outside of our system to be effective?
Well put. Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Bento, and then Councilmember Dolkart. Councilmember.
First, I'm really enjoying this discussion. Having done the tribal-state relations via laptop, which wasn't the same experience, but I won't pout tonight. It was life-changing. It was just great. And I have the chance to kind of indirectly interact with Dr. Joseph Bauerkamper, who was one of the faculty for that program, and he's phenomenal. But I have a couple of thoughts, and I'm not sure I can frame them in a coherent sort of way, but I'll try to do my best. I hope that as we are doing recruitment for our advisory committees, any kind of recruitment for appointments, that we really dig deep and reach out and do what we can to bring Indigenous representation to the Equity Advisory Committee, to MPOSC, to this council. Yes, we have a great leader in our chair, but we need to do more there as well. The other thing is that I think it would be a great idea if we were to explore the possibility of a tribal state relations type training, that we could invite interested cities, townships, and counties here in the metro region to be a part of, if they're interested. It's not a requirement, it's an invitation, and give them that experience. After I had the tribal state relations experience, two of my college classmates took a course through our alma mater, which had not a pretty history as it relates to schools, and it was phenomenal training. They came clean, they owned it, and then they talked about what they were doing to act, like you've said so eloquently, Allison. You know, what are you going to do about it now? And they're working on it. But I think more of that needs to be done. And I think if we offered that opportunity, there might be cities, counties, and townships that would say, you bet. The other question I have is, one of the struggles I have with diversity, equity, and inclusion is, I think we focus a lot on diversity and equity. But the question of inclusion for me is just excruciating. I recall walking around a lake on the east side of St. Paul a number of years ago when I lived in that area, seeing what appeared to be cultural community celebrations going on, but not feeling comfortable to approach them. And I would like to live in a community where when we have an Indigenous celebration, a Latino celebration, a Hmong celebration, a Somali celebration, that, and any kind of celebration, that everybody feels invited. I'm Caucasian and Irish, and I frankly don't care for St. Patrick's Day. I think it's a little overdone in a few locations, but I want people to feel, wherever it is, I want them to feel accepted. I worked for a Catholic church here in downtown St. Paul for 5 years, and I used to occasionally run into people who would say, well, I'm not Catholic, but I hope I heard about this church and I'm kind of interested. I hope it's okay. And I was always like, absolutely, you know, of course you're welcome. So I'd like us to figure out how we can generate, whether it's our regional parks or our community celebrations, whatever it is, that we bring cultures together and really strive to be inclusive. So I don't know if any of that makes any sense, but it feels better getting it off my chest, so.
Well said.
I'd like to say I lost 10 pounds with that, but I know I didn't. So thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Dolkart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, Angela and Allison, I just want to say thank you. I have a list, not all is related to what you two are presenting, but it's more or less a discussion for us to have and for us to consider as a council. The first one, I will just say thank you for the co-creation model of engagement. Often, and having been a staffer, often as a state agency, we go to community groups and say, here's the framework, here's the problem I'm trying to solve, can you help me? So we have pre-decided what that looks like. And so your representation of the community members being in the circle and the council staff shepherding Essen outside, listening in and really taking in. Just thank you for doing that. That's my first comment. The second is coming out of curiosity. You know, as I'm listening to you, regardless of the population of Native American in the Twin Cities area or visits to the parks, I do wonder to myself, maybe this is already in existence, Emmett, but I do wonder to myself, like, what would it look like if every park had a designated language, symbolism, different culture aspects of Native community, knowing this land is Native community land? Like, what would it look like in every single park, like having that dedication? So I could be visiting park in Egan, or I could be in St. Paul, but I would know who the land belonged to, who lived here, and have a language other than English. So that's one curiosity I have. And then the second one that I do have is around funding. And so I was trying to look up really quickly ENTRF, the LCCMR grants, the legacy funds, and I realized that sometimes Met Council will have dedicated fund, sometimes will be 50% of the fund that then the state matches. And I wonder what that co-creation of recommendations could move from that to co-create the co-funding model or participatory model. Like you would have a dedicated council fund for parks and regions and engagement, but it won't just be government to government, but you have Native communities and nonprofits, regardless of where they serve. It could be, a youth organization. It could be a community economic development organization. Like, what would their decisions of that funding could look like? And I think this may be beyond this committee. Maybe it's a council-wide thing. So that I'm sitting with, because I love the co-creation, but it doesn't mean much if it just stays around policy. And I want to see the funding mechanism. It shows up in the bullet point. What does shepherding of that looks like, where council plays, again, a partnership? We could co-fund it, but really letting community groups decide what that funding mechanism looks like. And the third thing that I'm really curious is, I'm wondering if City of Minneapolis had that MOU, why haven't the council adopted it or have a similar? So this, again, maybe above my level, but I would like us as a council, maybe it's something the chair and Judy and others who are on the executive committee could really shepherd. It's like this thinking, and that I think is needed. And I think one of the recommendations is it should not, the relationship with the tribal nation should not be dependent on one person or having somebody like Allison in the room. It should be all of our approach. And so that MOU, if that formalizes and institutionalizes how we work with communities, I'm all for it. And so if there's anything I could do, I'm probably going to email all of you within 2 months and like, why this didn't happen, but this is where I'm sitting with. I would like to make it happen.
Lovely. Thank you, Councilmember Ivan. Can I just get, I have kind of a long queue. Do you mind if I keep going, or did you guys
Please
want to
do.
say something? Cool. So I have Councilmember, well, I guess it's not that long. Councilmember Carter, Councilmember Minto. Councilmember Carter.
So much has been said, and there is so much excitement that we have to look forward to, given the relationship that has been established and the work that we're hearing about. It's my second time hearing about it because we were fortunate in our work group to hear about it this past week. Thankful, and I just have to applaud, I know as all of us do, the work that our chair has done in leading this effort forward. Thank you so much. We have a lot to look forward to, and I hear from the comments that are being made already that we're looking toward the commitments piece. And I thank you for the recognition and for the thinking that the group has done and is presenting to us about the need to adopt not just acknowledgement, but commitments, and to have actions mirrored in those commitments, action steps. I hear Councilmember Dolker talking about our readiness for those action steps, and I just want to share my excitement that that would happen. I look forward to our leading and convening around what it looks like when these partnerships are real. I mean, we've waited a long time. I know that the American Indian community has waited a long time. So to see these things materializing in this space isn't enough, but it's a start. And I look forward to how we can penetrate other communities and share the example of what we're doing. I get lost because I'm thinking so much about how wonderful this is, that we are doing the hard work, and it is hard, and it's going to get harder as we think about the kind of commitments that need to be made in order to rectify some of the history. But as we do this work, we're doing what is not only good for American Indian communities, but good for all of us, what will respect the land, the resources, the people that have come before us, that are here with us now, and that will come after us. So this is about us getting better and doing better work on behalf of all of us. Last but not least, I just wonder if there's anybody from the team that has been meeting that is here today with you, behind you. And if not, sure look forward to hearing those voices, seeing those faces at the appropriate time. Now, it's important that the work is done as it is in establishing the partnership now, but at the appropriate time, being able to personally thank the members that have been working together with you. But please pass along our thanks for this great work.
Ms. Torres, did you want to say something before I recognize Councilmember Vento?
No, please go ahead.
So, and there has been discussion about exactly that. I mean, yeah, this is wonderful discussion, you guys. I'm just thrilled with it. Councilmember Vento?
I'll pass in the interest of time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
I'm curious, sorry, I didn't know there was more in the presentation, but just going back to the recommendations of what you heard, was there anything specific to water or wastewater? And I know that access to sacred sites oftentimes involves water. But I'm just curious if you could expand on that. If you heard anything specific to water or specific to wastewater, I'd be interested in knowing that.
Do you want me to go? Yeah, go ahead. I can think of a few things. First, I will say, and you tied perfectly into our upcoming outline. Our next meeting does talk specifically about water policy, and so we'll get into it much more in depth then. But we know too that there's already been a lot of harm to sacred sites. Waukau, for example, is an example of an area where the council could shift our approach to expansion of that site or cleanup of that site, relocate, whatever that might be. And so that's been brought up. Cleaning up other areas like Pig's Eye. There have been examples given related specifically to environmental impacts that they're very much aware of that are the cause of government decisions. And so there has been some of that. We'll get much more in depth in that at our next meeting on the 13th. So do you want to add anything? Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Did you want to walk? Thanks, thank you. Ms. Torres, did you want to walk through this, or?
I'm happy to. I didn't know if you had more of a queue, so I was just going to wait.
Nope, that's
Okay.
it, right? For now. Yep, thanks.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'll just be very quick. Water policy, we've invited, because of the Memorial Holiday, we'll have a virtual meeting on environmental justice at the end of May. We've invited both Charles Carlson and Leslie Canderas for a conversation about transportation policy. Our senior manager, Sarah Berke, will be, and her team will be joining to talk about housing. In review of commitments and recommendations, I've also extended invitations to the Advisory Council for Chair Zelli and for the Regional Administrator Ryan to come to an upcoming meeting as well. Before we would come to the Committee of the Whole, which I think would be an appropriate time for Advisory Council members to come before you. So we have been thinking through exactly that. And of course, whether or not they are comfortable doing that. Sometimes we have to be careful for fear of persecution. And so we want to be very respectful of their level of comfort with having, their name attached to anything. That may happen in future, but we want to make sure that we're asking them for permission before that happens. With that then, we can conclude our presentation, and we'll be back for another update before this, like after another 3 meetings, for example. So we're kind of chunking it up in pieces.
Good. Questions or discussion? Councilmember Johnson?
Quick clarification, you don't need us on May 13th for virtual meeting?
No.
Okay,
Then-
just checking.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Chair and committee members, we have kept the
The
advisory
20th?
council meetings closed. We don't even
Yes.
invite a lot of staff to attend in order to ensure that there's a balance of power that is in favor of the advisory council participants, more so than council staff. So we're really trying to be careful of that power dynamic and really making sure that the participants feel as though it is a co-creation space for them.
Right. Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Wolf.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, Mr. Chair, you brought up the MOU with the city of Minneapolis, and it's been in operation since 2003, I think you said, and Hennepin County is in the process of doing that, and it was brought up, Councilmember Dolkar brought up a possibility of bringing something similar to that with the Met Council, which sounds very intriguing to me as well. And I'm curious, you have the most experience with the city of Minneapolis. It seems like it's been a pretty effective tool with the city. Do you think that's something that the council should explore? Not to put you too much on the spot, we can table that conversation, but I'm just
I would love
curious on your thoughts.
Thank you, Councilmember, and I would love to continue having this conversation. And we're miles further sort of in these conversations than I thought we would be at this point in this work. So I really applaud all y'all for that. And when I was at the city of Minneapolis, I was the lead on establishing the memo of understanding with the Metropolitan Urban Area Directors. But importantly, it was generated from the community. They came to me to establish this. And it's effective in that it exists and that it's been strengthened throughout the years, but it is only as effective as the unit of government wants it to be. And so, but it does give the community, the urban Indian community, a tool, an ability to engage the city in a different way. It's taken 20 years to get it to the point where it's kind of organically now passed into the county, Hennepin County. And so and it's policymakers that are really helping to drive that, and then excellent staff like ours here. I think these kind of framework, they're groundbreaking, right? No, as far as I know anyway, no other regional government is having this conversation like this, quite like this anyway. And so I would say, it's possible, it would be beautiful to move into that kind of a conversation and that kind of an understanding with the community. And I think the advisory committee members would feel very validated by I hope they hear this conversation. I don't know if anyone's listening in now, but I do hope you share this with them, because they, when you do stuff like this, it's about reputations, right? Reputations of Allison, my reputation or whatever. I was really surprised at the caliber of advisory council members that we got to commit. Allison was saying, or maybe it was Angela, at the first meeting, I was at the first meeting, I haven't been to one since, but we went around the room and pretty much to a person, the participants said, yeah, I don't really support land acknowledgements anymore. I don't really do this work anymore. Several of them said that. I don't accept these kinds of invitations. They shared their reasons why, but they could tell there's something different going on here. And Councilmember Carter, you used the word readiness. And I really feel like not just the community is ready, but we as a unit of government, we as a region are ready to have conversations in a different way. And just what's been going on here really lifts that up. I feel like we are ready to figure out what the next steps might be. So, yeah. So I have Councilmember Wolf, then Bento, then Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to echo the thanks of everybody else. I mean, this has been such a huge step forward in the relationship and understanding, and you guys are all responsible for that work, and we couldn't have done it without you. I want to just say thank you again, because we do want to have a good relationship, and for, work towards the future, and I'm glad to see that that's looking like it's what is going to happen. I really appreciate the idea of coordinating things so that people don't have to do it with each individual, because I know that's got to be just exhausting. Like you said, people just saying, I don't do this anymore because there's just too many people saying, do this, do this, do this. I think we're really bringing value to the region and to the relationship with the tribal members, by doing this, and I'm so thankful for it. I hope that we can take that same effort or that same attitude of respect to the rest of the communities and people, because so often people feel like the Met Council is just like do, and having a more respectful relationship in general, I think would be helpful
Agreed.
going forward.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento, and then Councilmember Johnson.
Just a quick suggestion. When you were talking about going forward with that idea, I think it might be a good idea to tap Elias and his experience and you as well, Allison, your experience with Canada and what state and local, or not state, but territory and local and Canadian entities have done as far as engagement and partnerships. I think it'd be worth talking to them about it. And it might not be a bad idea to even reach out to the Department of Interior at the national level to see if they have any models for it.
Great. Excellent suggestions. Further discussion, and then we probably should move along a little bit. This has just been fascinating. Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, this is all great, and I'll just be brief. So we're excited about this, but we have to always move forward at the speed of trust and relationship, and this cannot be transactional. I think we're a very transactional society in general. I'll own my own transactionalness in a lot of, but transactional is, but that can't be what this is. And to your point, people that are being tapped to come in and do and are exhausted in the process, that's not right nor fair. So we might be excited, but again, we'll have to meet people where they're at and then decide together. And it might look similar to the MOU of Minneapolis or what's coming forward in Hennepin County. It could look very different. It might not, who knows what it'll be, but I just think we always have to be very mindful. And I say this with a lot of appreciation for all of us in our day-to-day work, but we are box checkers and we are motivated and going. And I think that just sometimes maybe, stepping back and just being silent and trying to figure it out is better than doing it the wrong way and blowing it up.
Love it. Thank you, Councilmember. And I had all these notes that I was going to bring up, but really all the committee members raised all the issues that I'm used to. I guess I'm just used to it being more of a heavy lift. And so it's just super refreshing to not have to be the one saying all this. And to your point, Councilmember Johnson, about not being transactional, and that's exactly right? And so most Native cultures, certainly the ones we're dealing with here, are about relationships, right? Not transactions. So relationships to each other, to the water, to the land, and so it's reframing that. So I'm not going to make all the points I was going to make because you guys are making them better than I could. So thank you for that much. Let's see. Anything to close, Ms. Torres, Ms. Waukau?
No, I would just apologize to my colleagues because I know we ran over time.
That's our fault.
Thank you.
Great work. We look forward to following the progress. Thank you. Oh, and I wanted to acknowledge Jillian as well, who I see is here. So she's an integral part of this team. So thank you for your work. Great. All right. We'll move on to the new numeral 2 information item, which is the 2050 Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan. We're at 60%, right? This is the presentation. Yeah, good job.
Probably 65%.
Wow, excellent. Overachievers, I see.
Mr. Chair, council members, I'm Emmett Mullen. I'm the Regional Parks Manager. Thank you for hosting us today. As you can tell, the team is all here. We're here to present our 60% plan to you. I want to be respectful of the time that you have. So I was thinking we would shoot for a less than 20-minute presentation, maybe as much conversation as you want. But if we took 20 minutes, then we could get to your next item. That will
Councilmember-
be our
I'm sorry,
goal.
Emmett. Councilmember Wolf.
Do we have to get all of these done today? Because, I mean, if we're having a good conversation, or what's the deal?
Yeah, Director Barajas.
Mr. Chair, council members, I think to the extent we can get through as much as we can, we do want to review 60% draft with you before we make them available publicly at the end of this month. We have one more CDC meeting this month too, and I also recognize that we have business on our calendars too. So we also don't want to rush our conversations, so we want to be
Play
sure
it by
that,
ear.
yep, we can play it by ear, and certainly anything that we're here to listen and hear your feedback, and any additional information or conversation we need to have, we can bring back at our next meeting.
Cool. All right.
So we'll shoot for a 20-minute presentation or less. And I am going to step out and soon pass this to Colin Kelly, Tracey, Kinney, Kevin Phan, and Jessica Lee. The one defining feature of the Parks Policy Plan work has been collaboration with council members, our Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, our regional park implementing agencies. We've been moving work forward through a work group process that's collaborative groups made up of council and agency staff. And we have a lot to share with you today. It's sort of a content-rich presentation. We will come back to you again before the 90% plan. I got to work that out with Lisa, but the idea that this is not a one and done thing, that this is an ongoing thing. I just wanted to call out to Councilmember Carter, your mental model for this is about us getting better. That is the model here. Like, we are really trying to move things forward. And Councilmember Johnson, the speed of trust is something that we really recognize. So with that, I'll pass it to Colin, and we will jump in.
Thanks, Emmett. I'm going to advance the slide here. So first, I'm going to start with a summary of advice that we've received recently from both the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission early last month, along with the Community Development Committee early last month as well. We did also just meet with the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission on Thursday, MPOSC Thursday. So as we're going through the presentation this afternoon, we'll likely kind of report out verbally some of the things that we heard from MPOSC on Thursday as well. But let's start with early April. You see before you, these are some of the learnings, some of the advice we heard from MPOSC. We shared an information item on the policy plan like we're doing today, and asked for input and advice. And we got a number of interesting and exciting insights to share with you. First, a recommendation to outline which items are updated every 4 years versus items that are updated every 10 years. The Regional Development Guide is updated every 10 years, but the Regional Parks Policy Plan is meant to be updated every 4. So there's kind of a difference in those cycles. To define terms and phrases like natural systems and areas not well served, and that we define which tasks are the council's responsibility versus which tasks are regional park implementing agency responsibilities. We also heard MPOS tell us that there's a need for building more awareness of the regional parks and trails system. And from a financial perspective, MPOS underscored the importance of the equity grant program and the need for continued support of this program, as well as a need to emphasize the council's fiduciary responsibilities. Moving into the advice we heard from you all early last month, April 1st meeting. Again, we shared a similar information item and sought your advice, and we got a lot of good advice, I would say. And some of it you'll see here. First, when prioritizing natural systems and acquisition, that restoration efforts should be balanced across the region. This elevates the importance of geographic balance in how we acquire and restore lands in the regional parks and trails system. We also heard that it's important to define what areas not well served means for locating new regional parks or trails. And of course, as noted on the last slide, we heard the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission say this as well. So this is a point well made. With regard to climate, council members supported the idea of telling a better story about the regional parks and trails system and how it can and does have a positive impact on climate resilience and water quality. On the topic of the Parks and Trails Planning Handbook, there was some concern expressed about the potential lack of oversight from commissioners and council members. Finally, with regard to finance, council members encouraged financial accountability when working with both legacy and environmental and natural resource trust fund dollars. Council staff appreciate the advice shared by all of you and the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, and will continue to consider how best to integrate it as the draft plan advances in the next days and weeks. Now, over the next 3 slides, I'll provide you with a high-level summary of the key changes proposed for the 2050 Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan, which will be a chapter in the Regional Development Guide. This content largely tracks with pages 4 through 8 in your information item. First, we've proposed some language changes throughout the plan, including changing master plan to long-range plan, changing regional park system to regional parks and trails system, natural resources to natural systems, and resident to visitor. In the introduction, or section 1, regional parks and trails specific vision, mission, and values and objectives are proposed for inclusion, as are a set of system-specific existing conditions and a research and engagement summary. In the system plan, or section 2, a new policy and set of actions are proposed to elevate the existing work council staff take on in partnership with regional park implementing agencies. Definitions and descriptions of each of the system's existing classifications, including regional parks, park reserves, regional trails, and special recreation features, are proposed to be consolidated into one-page summaries. And finally, council staff proposed the addition of 2 new unit classifications, including for cultural landscapes and open space natural areas. Continuing through the Parks and Trails Policy Plan space, natural systems, climate resiliency, planning, and system protection make up sections 3 through 6. Natural systems, or section 3, proposes a new policy and 4 actions associated with locating, acquiring, protecting regional park and trail lands throughout the region. For those who are familiar with the existing Regional Parks Policy Plan, this section reframes the existing siting and acquisition policy and proposes moving locating and acquisition to the action level. Climate resiliency, or section 4, proposes a new policy and 6 actions focused on council research, agency coordination of operations, public awareness, and education. The planning and system protection sections remain largely unchanged. These are sections 5 and 6. Some language has been added to differentiate focused and administrative minor long-range plan amendments in the planning section. Some content from each of the existing planning and system protection chapters is proposed to be moved to either the Parks and Trails Planning Handbook or the Grant Administration Guide. These additional resources are meant to complement the content proposed for the Regional Parks and Trails chapter of the Regional Development Guide by including more detailed and oftentimes procedural information in a separate space, much like the Council's Local Planning Handbook, which provides key information to local communities and others via an easy-to-use online resource. One suggestion we heard at last Thursday's MPOS meeting was to integrate some language that discusses the relationship between the Parks and Trails Policy Chapter, the Parks and Trails Planning Handbook, and the Grant Administration Guide. This could be a good addition to the introduction or first section of this chapter. Council staff will be working on this in the days and weeks ahead as well, so stay tuned on that one. Moving right along, the last 2 sections of the Regional Parks and Trails chapter are recreation, facilities and programming, and finance. And these were a focus of last Thursday's MPOS meeting. The recreation section proposes removal of a static list of activities that is about 50 years old and instead proposes using a criteria-based evaluation system to assess potential activities and facilities. Actions that focus on cross-sector opportunities, fostering equity, and raising awareness of the regional parks and trail system are also included. The finance section is proposed to be split into 2 parts, with one focused on actions and the other focused on statutory requirements. Proposed changes include exploring increased council funding and additional sources of funding, and reassessing funding program caps for regional park implementing agencies. For the remainder of this presentation, different council staff will be sharing high-level overviews of each section of the draft 60% Regional Parks and Trails Policy Plan. And then it's your turn. We are excited to hear your feedback and suggestions. The first section is the introduction. We'll start with me, and then we'll move on. Okay, the first section is the introduction. The introduction is proposed to include fundamental and foundational information about the regional parks and trails system, the partnership with the 10 regional park implementing agencies, system vision, mission, and values, research engagement summaries, and more. One of the other foundational pieces that is proposed for inclusion is regional parks and trails objectives. Council staff shared draft objectives with you last month and previously, so we won't spend a whole lot of time here today, but it is worth noting that these objectives connect the 5 cross-cutting regional goals to the policies and actions we'll be covering in the remainder of the presentation. The draft objectives include foster equity and belonging, take care of what we have, protect and restore, adapt and mitigate, and meet future needs. Draft existing conditions. These statements provide critical context to the spaces that the council helps plan for and fund, and that our implementing agency partners own and operate. Importantly, these statements consider how the region and the regional park system came to be. They highlight the critical importance of parks, trails, and the outdoors to people and communities. It makes clear the connection to climate and that we have a role in helping care for the environment. And it acknowledges that funding continues to be a challenge. Put another way, there is a history of inequitable development. Regional parks and trails are vital to people and communities. Climate is changing, and the system faces growing pains. Like the draft objectives I just covered, these existing conditions inform the draft policies and actions you see in the 60% draft plan and that we'll be summarizing yet this afternoon. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Tracey to move us into section 2.
Thanks, Colin. Section 2 covers the system plan. The system plan includes the maps and lists of the regional parks and trails that comprise the system, including units that are open to the public, planned, and search. The system plan also includes classification descriptions of the types of regional parks and trails, including regional parks, park reserves, special recreation features, and regional trails. The system plan features new policy and actions to describe the existing system plan management and to better support the regional parks and trails system. The new policy reads, maintain a robust and current set of data, maps, plans, processes, and applications to support regional parks and trails planning. The new actions cover review and update the system planning classifications, 2, to identify and conduct research, and 3, to annually update the map data set. And you can see on the screen here, it goes into a little bit more detail, and that's also in your information item. The system plan is also proposing 2 new unit classifications, as we've talked about a little bit today. So the cultural landscape classification and the open space natural areas classification. Right now, we have in the plan that the cultural landscapes are historical significant properties that show evidence of human interaction with the physical environment. And this is a definition from the U.S. National Park Service that just serves as a placeholder for this bigger process that we're going to be engaging in, and the fabulous work that Angela and Allison was just talking about from the American Indian Advisory Committee. So this classification serves to recognize a range of culturally important areas within the regional parks and trails system and future consideration of additional properties. This classification will be developed in partnership with the regional park implementing agencies, some of whom are currently working in partnership with tribal groups to define this proposed classification as part of our collective work on Indigenous reconciliation. So this classification will be further developed in the 90% plan in August, for the August 2024 deadline. At the April Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Committee meeting, or at the May 2nd one, I'm sorry about that, Commissioner Taylor mentioned that the cultural landscape classification should include a reference to belonging and identity to nature and the outdoors, and that this could also inform interpretive narratives. We've also heard from MPOS that they're looking for a robust definition as well, and they'd like to see consideration of other cultures and races. So these are some preliminary concepts. There hasn't really been a lot of conversation nor a lot of definitions on the table yet. The second proposed classification is a open space natural area classification. Open spaces and natural areas provide ecosystem services, support wildlife, trees, and vegetation, and may promote natural system connectivity and offer opportunities for recreation. This classification includes high-quality natural areas as well as areas with restoration potential. This classification recognizes the importance of protecting natural areas and open space as an important tool to adapt and mitigate climate change. This classification will also be developed in partnership with the regional park implementing agencies and be further developed for the 90% plan in August. And now I'll hand it off to Kevin.
Thank you, Tracey. So the next section that we will be covering is the natural systems policy and actions. So as mentioned previously by Colin, the natural systems policy and section overall takes place in the existing regional parks policy plan where siting and acquisition previously existed. And within this section, siting and acquisition has been moved as locating and acquisition into the action level, just to reframe some of these priorities. So in the natural systems section, this area focuses on the identification of high-quality natural areas for protection, acquisition of these lands into the regional parks and trails system, and then also the maintenance of these existing natural systems within our regional parks and trail lands. So the policy currently reads as identify, protect, restore, and maintain lands with high-quality natural features, access to water, and/or restoration potential as part of the regional parks and trails system. The actions are focused around the themes of identification, acquisition, research around these natural systems, and then maintenance of our existing natural systems. And the actions read locating and acquisition priorities, equity and geographic balance, natural systems research, and maintenance of natural systems. So some of the key changes that are taking place within this section are the aforementioned reframing of locating or siting and acquisition into the action level. But in addition to that, there is also the addition of equity as a consideration for geographic balance and determining that while locating and identifying areas throughout the metropolitan region that could be seen as an area that could serve communities to the regional parks and trails system. And then another key change within this section is the council commitment to natural systems research within the parks and trails system. One key example is reassessing and updating the regionally significant ecological areas data set that we use to do some of our work. The next section that we have is focused on climate resiliency, and this section tries to interpret and carry out a lot of climate action work that the council tries to commit itself to and focuses on climate resiliency work, specifically in adaptation and mitigation work that can be done through the regional parks and trails system. All of these policies and all of the entire policy and all 6 associated actions are entirely new to this section, and the policy reads as adapt and enhance the regional parks and trails system to promote resilience to climate change, including the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. And within these 6 actions, they focus on the themes of convening our regional park implementing agencies to coordinate and carry out climate action work, There's also several actions that focus on the council commitment to performing research and providing that to our implementing agencies. And then there's also several other actions that focus on including and educating local community members and organizations to either improve their awareness or increase awareness of the regional parks and trails role in climate change, or to even help them to even have them assist in us carrying out this climate work, as seen with Action 3 in citizen science. Some of the key changes that have occurred are mostly the incorporation of this policy and its 6 actions, but there's also just the increased commitment to council research around climate action and climate resiliency, such as greenhouse gas inventories, or potentially assessing the sequestration potential of the regional parks and trails. And then, of course, another big change is the commitment to building public awareness and just telling a better story of the regional parks and trails and its role in climate change and climate action. Last week at the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission meeting, we had found that many commissioners were generally supportive of these proposed policy and actions that were being included within this section, but wanted to see potential further consideration of adding more measurable metrics and benchmarks that we could use to track our progress towards obtaining and achieving these desired actions and outcomes. Now I will be passing it over to Colin to discuss our planning section.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Section 5 is planning, or long-range planning if you prefer. Unlike the past 3 sections, this section isn't proposed to change too much, at least in content. As mentioned previously, some of the content is proposed to be moved from the existing Regional Parks Policy Plan to the Regional Parks and Trails Planning Handbook. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Here in the planning policy, we've got 3 actions, but we'll start with the policy itself, which is to promote long-range planning and help provide integrated resource planning across jurisdictions. The 3 actions you see before you include long-range plan requirements, enhanced multimodal access, and cost sharing. I'd like to shine a light on the first action for a moment. Each time Council Park staff bring a long-range plan from one of the regional park implementing agencies to you, and then the council for approval, we share a summary of our analysis of these plan requirements. This might be the Regional Parks and Trails action you are most familiar with. Council staff, of course, do their best to keep that analysis pretty high level, but wow, agencies really do an amazing job responding to plan requirements, and let's just say there are a lot of details in those long-range plans. So going forward, council staff propose integrating those detailed long-range plan requirements into the Regional Parks and Trails Planning Handbook that's currently under development. Again, the purpose of doing so is to keep the Regional Development Guide more focused on objectives, policies, and actions, and less so on the detailed procedures or processes by which those actions are implemented. Committee members will have an opportunity to learn more about the proposed Parks and Trails Planning Handbook before the Regional Development Guide public comment period begins in August, and we share a draft 90% plan. So now I'm going to pass it back to Tracey to share a summary of Section 6.
Thanks, Colin. The system protection section, Section 6, discusses how the council protects regional parks and trails system investments through comprehensive planning, land conversions, and utilities. So the policies and actions for system protection, for the system protection section are remaining the same, with the exception of some of the current actions related to reimbursement of contamination and environmental site assessments will be removed. This language is redundant. It's already included in the Parks Acquisition Opportunity Fund program that is part of the Grants Administration Guide. So that's well documented there. It's just redundant content, but right now it is a proposed removal, and it could always land in the planning handbook or the grant administration guide. The main proposed changes for the system protection section includes moving content related to processes and criteria into the Regional Parks and Trails Planning Handbook. This includes moving and clarifying system protection criteria for Action 2, conversions, Action 3, telecommunication towers, and Action 4, placement of utilities. And just for consistency, the policy for Section 6 is to protect public investment in acquisition and development by assuring that every component in the system is able to fully carry out its designated role as long as a need for it can be demonstrated. The topics for the actions include local comprehensive plans, conversions, telecommunication towers, and placement of utilities. And now I'll hand it back to Kevin, who is going to talk about Section 7.
Thank you, Tracey. So Section 7 covers our recreation facilities and programming policy and actions. This section has recently undergone some significant modifications, but it currently hosts a lot of our recreational opportunities offered in the regional parks and trails system, while it also discusses actions that try to bring more people into our regional parks and trails system, while also elevating equity and ensuring that we're fostering a sense of belonging in our regional parks and trails. So the policy currently reads as foster a sense of belonging by providing a wide spectrum of leisure and play opportunities while connecting people, places, and the natural world. Within this policy, there are actually 5 proposed actions. I'll get to the 5th one in a second, but they read increase equity in programs, activities, and places, build the relationship between people and natural systems, establish and broaden cross-sector opportunities, raise awareness of regional parks and trails, and the 5th one is focusing on trail system coordination, and I just thought to bring that up. We are currently in the process of updating that existing action, and a work group will be underway very soon. Some of the key changes within this specific section includes the elevation of our equity action. So we moved it into the first action instead of the third. And then another key change that has been noted is in Action 2, build the relationship between people and natural systems. This is where we had that proposed removal of the static recreational activities list and started shifting more towards a criteria-based system to ensure more inclusion and equity opportunities while assessing recreational opportunities that are offered within our regional parks and trails system. Another key addition is the emphasis on trying to build cross-sector opportunities and connect to other sectors and build connections between public health and the regional parks, or education and just the community component of these gathering spaces. And then the other item is the addition of public awareness and trying to kind of increase awareness to the public of our regional parks and trails system. During our MPOS discussion last week, we focused specifically on recreation facilities and programming and finance, which we'll get to in a bit. But overall, the commission saw the idea of awareness as important, and we're very supportive of this idea and proposed action. And then there was also some brief discussion around the idea of shifting towards a criteria-based system and assessing how we can maintain our status as a regional system while also ensuring that we are bringing in new activities that can bring more folks into the system. Now I will pass it over to Jessica to cover our finance topic.
Ms. Lee, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. Last but not least is our finance section. So we do have a new policy statement to administer and provide financial oversight of the state and regional funding to the 10 regional park implementing agencies in support of the regional parks and trail system. Our current existing policy statements states to provide adequate and equitable funding, and that is subjective and hard to measure, so we wanted something more straightforward. We are proposing 6 actions. The first 5 are existing strategies in our current plan. And there's only a couple significant changes to these. Action 2, equity considerations. This is going to be primarily about the equity grant program now. We've really expanded that language to show how important it is and to provide some of the history now that we've had 3 grant cycles. Action 4, Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund. We are proposing changing the limit cap that the agencies have. So currently, each agency is eligible for up to 1.7 million per account. We have 2 accounts, Parks and Trails Legacy Fund and Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And we're proposing increasing that to 2 million for Legacy and 3 million for Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And partly that's because Legacy is a lot easier to use, so that money has a little bit more demand. And we've had that limit of 1.7 for a very long time. And then finally, we have one new action, Action 6, regional funding commitment. The council will actively analyze its regional funding budget strategy and pursue increasing regional funding commitment for the system wherever possible. And as we were going through our plan, we realized a lot of what we had in there was actually statutory requirements that were kind of mixed in with the strategies. And so we're proposing moving these out of the actions into a separate part. None of these are changing. The language hasn't changed at all, except for minor edits here and there, and maybe simplifying some of the language. And we'll be updating the numbers, of course, for the 5-year CIP and the cost to complete the system. So with that, that's our presentation, and we are all happy to take questions and have conversation.
Great. Thank you all to the team. Great presentation. Very well well presented. And I would note for committee members and then for people who are maybe monitoring this meeting that the entire 60% draft plan is available on the website, linked from the agenda. Discussion. I'll start with Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Dolkar.
Okay. I don't have a whole lot to say specifically, but it's very apparent that the comments that have been made by the council over the years are being incorporated into this 2050 plan. I think it's really good that you've looked at areas where there's a better need to measure, and that shows good stewardship and accountability. I'm just impressed with that, and I see that where you say that there are new changes, it would take us forward towards our goals, and it's good to be a part of this. It's going to have a lasting effect. So thank you to everyone who has participated and to all of the people that were engaged.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Dolkar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of comments, and I don't expect all 3 of you to solve them. And then I think this is where I'll acknowledge being a new council member. I think I'm missing some pieces, and so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in this one. The first comment I have is under the climate change and research. That I think proposal with working with the regional partners, that I think absolutely sounds wonderful. And the curiosity for me there is the natural carbon sink and what does that mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions look like. And I was thinking with parks, you're thinking trees, that is like the most easiest one. But I do wonder, and I don't know this because I'm not that familiar with all of the systems in the region, but like what is the native plant prairie and their potential for sequestration? And I don't know if there's enough data around it. So that's like one curiosity I'm sitting with. And then the second one that I realized, maybe this is outside of the scope of council, and maybe this is where somebody mentioned, like, what is the council responsible for and what are the other implementing agencies responsible for? So I'm maybe blurring the line here a little bit. But, I've seen the data on the access to regional parks a lot in all sorts of documents over the years. And what I'm sitting with is the way I'm receiving the plan, and I read the plan last night, so my memory is fuzzy, and I was trying to look up where I saw it. You guys there was a really good data around visitors. So visitors is one thing, and then there was like 80% of people walked or biked to the park. But what I'm realizing is there are communities across the region that do not have access to park, period. And I realized it's not just council, it is the implementing agencies and the cities and everybody else who needs to work with you. But I do wonder, and so when I'm looking at the plan, it feels very passive in that they will propose an acquisition of a land, and then we will fund it or we will support it, and then it goes into our regional plan, and then we fund it. That I feel like unless you're super, maybe you'll correct me, thank you. Unless we're like super intentional, and I could be wrong, but super intentional about saying, here's the map of what communities where we know park or regional park doesn't exist, where somebody within 10 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever that timing is, that you can walk or bike and get to a park, then you do more of an intentional, targeted outreach and say, we need to see a plan. Like, and then there aren't that many land available now in Twin Cities area or very fully developed. I'm like thinking Egan, Invergrove still has a couple of lands, but like there may be communities that don't have land or land that are going to be super expensive, but the intentionality of like trying to get parks in the community makes more sense. Because visitors means like you're either have a park that's really close by or you have access to car that you can drive to. And over time, I've seen the data of people not having access to park for a really long time. And I sort of wonder what that changing, and this could be, again, outside of scope. And one of the best things people say about Twin Cities is our trail parks, our biking parks, biking trails and regional parks. And so this, I will put it out there. And the third thing that I am curious about, and I have a question related to, is finance. And so am I clear in understanding that the statutory requires all of the money other than the equity portion to go to regional implementing agencies? Because this is where I would tie back to my comment earlier about dedicated money that American Indian nonprofit organizations have a say in funding, or like the co-creation, co-funding model is there like a statutory fix that we need where council is able to dedicate some money to nonprofits and not have it go through city park system?
May I answer?
Ms. Lee,
Or attempt
please.
to answer? Thank you, Chair and council members. We do highly encourage partnerships for our competitive grant programs. And so the money does have to go through, one of the 10 agencies has to be the financial holder of the money, but we encourage them to work with partners. They can contract with partners. We do what we can to be flexible to really encourage the community involvement.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So to just clarify, this is currently written in statute, but not in like, it's only in statute, right? So council could initiate a policy change through the government relations process and advocate for a different way of funding this. I now realize I'm getting in too much into the weeds.
Director Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. The council could initiate a process to do that. The council also could use its own funding outside of state funds to do that and designate eligible entities within your own flexible spending dollars, general fund dollars. There's currently a proposal right now at the legislature for a community tree planting program where the legislature is making both local governments eligible as well as tribal nations and implementing agencies all under that same umbrella. So a lot of what we have here are statutory requirements, but from time to time they designate it for us, and in other times we're working very closely through partnerships with implementing agencies.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, thank you. And then your other questions, Councilmember Berke, are you just putting out there or did you want a response now?
No, I don't need a response.
Okay, perfect.
I realize it's not
Yeah.
fixable in
No,
one
no, I
discussion.
appreciate it.
To answer the climate.
Oh, okay, Director Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember, to your question around climate and carbon sinks in the native prairie, we have done some initial analysis on that work, and it's something that our climate researchers are actually digging into in more depth and details. We, especially with the funding we have from the Environmental Protection Agency for the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, to do more in-depth modeling of our actual landscape, actually tied to what Kevin had mentioned earlier around identifying regionally significant ecological area. So getting a better handle on what's actually on our landscape within the 7-county region, so that then we can apply the appropriate emissions reductions factors to those. We have some initial research from a partnership with I think it was Princeton and another university a couple of years ago with a couple of student groups who had done some work at a kind of macro level that we need to refine further. So it certainly is part of our plans here.
Thank you.
I have in queue Councilmembers Wolf and then Bento. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of this, I read through it's a lot. And reading the narrative at the very beginning of it, I feel like some things were sort of overstated a little bit, and I don't think we serve ourselves by trying to overstate the, impacts of things. Like, I mean, the regional park system started in what, 1972?
74.
74. So talking about things that happened way before that with racial covenants and stuff, I don't think is necessarily a major factor in how the regional park systems have come together. A lot of them are relatively new. I mean, some are not even open yet, and some have barely anything in them in some of the outer parts of the region. And things that happened in Minneapolis and St. Paul 80 years ago don't necessarily have an effect on the entire system. So making it sound like that's a major factor in the current system, I don't know, serves us very well. And it also sort of makes it sound like it's terrible when we have a great park system. And I don't know that we need to flog ourselves over and over to claim that things are worse than they currently are. That brings me to the visitation thing, in that with the regional park system is just one part, and there is some discussion of that there are local parks and regional parks and state parks and so on, but we never do research about parks as a whole. We've talked about that forever, about we don't look at, does everybody have what they need for parks? We just say, do you go to the regional park? And like when my kids were growing up, we were in the city park every single day, all summer, because we had baseball games for each different kid, and then my husband was playing baseball, and we just didn't have time to go to the regional parks. It wasn't that our park needs weren't being met or that we weren't welcome in the parks. People have different needs and desires. If you're playing soccer every day, or if you're downhill skiing in the winter or whatever, you're getting out and getting, it doesn't even have to be a city park to get your outdoor needs met. You may have a fantastic garden that you just weed and play with your plants all day long in your own yard. We should be looking at, do people have their needs met, not portraying it as this terrible racist thing that not as many people are going to a specific type of park. You're overstating what the research says, and I don't think that helps us at all to do that when we haven't done the overall research on, do people have what they need? Most cities in the region have parks within 3/4 of a mile of most of the houses. That's kind of the regional benchmark, is to be able to walk to a park from houses when new development is going on. I know Lakeville has that. I had plenty of parks to walk to when I was growing up in Golden Valley and Crystal. I mean, it's kind of a standard. And I hope that we continue to focus on protecting the big natural spaces that wouldn't have protection otherwise. And that brings me to the concern about the open spaces part of the thing of how do we decide which ones would be regional? Because there are cities that are doing that all the time. They're taking them as park dedication, they're buying them, they're having them donated to them. And cities should be doing that as part of their normal development. It's not our job to take over their work or put regional money into just one part of the region, protecting something that we wouldn't do everywhere else. We don't have enough money to build out the system that we have planned. So taking on what is normally a city responsibility in terms of protecting open space doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There are cities that have parks that are big enough to be regional parks, but they're not. They have greenways with trails through them that are nice enough to be a regional trail, but they're a city trail. I went on a, 15, 20-mile bike ride yesterday entirely on city trails that were gorgeous. None of them happened to be regional trails. And so I think we need to make sure we're taking care of the whole region, but let's not feel like we have to take care of a city that maybe isn't pulling their weight on their local facilities, if that makes sense. There's probably more, but I've talked enough right now.
Any response? Otherwise, I'll recognize Councilmember Bento and then Councilmember.
Just briefly, and I might say in newer developments, and I'm talking like maybe 30 years, even more ago, local cities are making sure that the developers put parks in the developments that are private parks, that are connected to the trails that take them to the city parks and then the regional parks. So I just wanted to acknowledge the role we're playing and how layered it is. And people, kind of like snowplows, they don't care what color the truck is as long as it plows their street. Same thing, I think, with open space and parks. And yet I understand the huge importance we have with our implementing agencies because they are region-wide and I think are the connective tissue that everybody kind of rolls up into from their thing that they can walk outside, their house and get to the very micro-local park.
Councilmember Bento, then Councilmember Carter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to piggyback on Councilmember Wolf. You're right. I'm guessing you were probably the only person on that bike trail or series of trails yesterday that knew whether you were in a local park or a regional park. Because as you said, Councilmember Johnson, people don't care, And this is a discussion that MPOSC members, commissioners have had more than once and will continue to have. And one of the things we've talked about is the idea of kind of a big picture of what parks are out there. Whether it's, Como Park Conservatory or a neighborhood park, community park 3 blocks away. So if we kind of had an inventory, it would be beneficial to everybody so we could see where the gaps are. But Councilmember Wolf, you're right. Cities have an obligation and counties and townships have an obligation in this as well. But I just want to say that these 10 park agencies are really doing a great job, as is our staff. And I continue to be impressed. I was at the Three Rivers Park District's annual State of the Park event a couple weeks ago, and in several instances during the chair of that agency, or the president of that agency, he noted the partnerships that they've had with the Met Council and work that we've done together in Three Rivers. So we're doing good work where we're doing it. And a lot of times folks don't know, that they're in a regional park or in a state park or a national park. Most people don't know that we have a national park right here in the 7-county metro area. So,
Because they take credit for everybody else's parks.
Who does?
The national park.
No, they don't. But anyway, I just wanted to note that it's an ongoing conversation, and information both in terms of social media and at park sites is what's going to help us deal with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Carter, then Councilmember Lindstrom. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you very much. I always learn so much from our meetings, and particularly when Councilmember Wolf speaks, because you have so much history and knowledge in this area. And I am guilty also of not having been bothered one bit by the depth of information related to history and current circumstances. With consideration for everything that has been said, we are all responsible together, and we need to make sure that each is doing its part where our partners are concerned, we have a lot to work out together. And so I really do appreciate knowing the history here and having it inside our document as it reflects on our current conditions and understanding the extent to which people's needs are met individually, in their families, in their communities is really important. And that is the key point. And at the same time, where there is not access and opportunity to amenities such as parks, you know, I know that I can take my granddaughter out and she will really, really, really enjoy a bucket of water. I mean, she does. She loves a bucket of water. But boy, when I introduced her to a lake, it made a difference in her learning to swim, in her being able to be safe in the environment and connected to nature. And so I want to make sure that the amenities that we provide in our community are available and accessible to all, and to understand that policies we make today should be informed by the lessons that we've learned from the past. So it's in that way that I really, truly appreciate the knowledge of history included in this document. You know, I want to make sure that as we think about the overstatements, you know, we not take fact as overstatement, you know, that we assess that very, very carefully as you look at any editing toward the 90%. And again, thank you for all the knowledge of so many members who've served on this board for so long, and for everything that you've stated into this meeting today. And thank you also for understanding that we learn and grow from our history, and those that don't know it are doomed to repeat it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just three things jumped out at me, things that I was excited about. First of all, I love the fact that the equity considerations, the equity grant program is built into the finance section, that program is now just going beyond a pilot status and is really getting ingrained into our documentation. Planning documents here is exciting to me. And then number two, in the climate section, I'm excited about the operation and efficiencies section, which means that our implementing agencies, this is how I read it, should be as energy efficient as possible, should use renewables, should use best practices when it comes to stormwater with their own facilities and their own operations. They should be models for all of the visitors on what to do with those facilities. That gets me excited. And then last but definitely not least, the citizen science component to the climate section as well. I just think that's so cool. That's it. I'm like a bucket of water when it comes to citizen science. That's what gets me jazzed up. When people are out there and they're collecting data on butterflies or water quality or soil, whatever it is, I just think that's one of the best ways to learn and most effective ways for all of us to gather that data. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, I just want to respond to, the comment that was made in response to Councilmember Wolf's statement that we're overstating the race issues. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I also believe that our history is very valuable, and we had a presentation about acknowledging what has happened to Native Americans in this country, and I think we also want to do the same with other minorities that have had systemic racism. Just putting it out there, that is what it is. And as public servants, we have a responsibility to not only acknowledge where we have those weaknesses, where we still have traces, some small, some large, of systemic racism, that we as policymakers have a responsibility as good stewards and policymakers to not only acknowledge, but to remediate the issues that are in our system and ensure that everyone has access and opportunities.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Dolkar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two comments, and I'll keep them very short. The first one, I actually really did appreciate the history of environmental protection movement that started. It really started from taking land away from American Indian to protect land from American Indian, like very, very racist in judgment and actually in an effort to take away land. So I think that history acknowledgement makes sense to me, because we are talking about regions and park system. We're talking about habitat protection, and you have to always think about the nature and people and the relationship back and forth. So that I really appreciated. But what I am hearing is that there is a gap in mapping the access to park, not the visitor visits number, but maybe there is a gap in between what the regional park is serving, what city is serving, what is the 10 implementation agencies is serving in the Twin Cities. Maybe that's the addendum that needs to go with this plan. And I realize this is sort of a request to Lisa, you, Ahmed, and the team. It may take dedicated money, it may take dedicated staff, it may take coordination, but I think maybe mapping where people have access and don't have access, and where the gap in coordination of building those spaces are, maybe is our first step. Because if you look up inequality of American parks, there's like articles after articles capturing, and that is the tale of planning, right? It's intentional planning. Like, I don't take it for granted that when I walk out of my house and drive, like somebody thoughtfully, intentionally planned the red light that is in front of my house. Very similarly, people thoughtfully planned the parks. And so what that tells me is that there are communities that we never planned the parks for. And so the visitor number isn't telling you that people are not visiting park, it's telling you people don't have access to it close enough that they can actually access it. And Oprah did an interview a long time ago, and in her story, she talks about when she realized she was rich is when she saw trees. And that just tells you, the difference. So anyway, just thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
To the points about mapping parks, I'm shocked with all the comp plans that lay out all of the developments that note where all of the parks that the city's doing and that the implement, it's all there. And so is it in GIS somewhere? Yeah, I was gonna say, there's gotta be a way because it's all being mapped for the past 50 years. So, and in layers, and we could, I come from local government, so I'm so used to seeing how all of this is layered in, but I'm not smart like all of you people. So I think and I think the point is good, just so people can get access to parks. And then we should, though, pay special attention to where there are programs for people, because the park itself is one thing, very valuable, but programming in the park then becomes very important to people. And I think that's where there's a gap, and to understand what the local units of government and their parks are doing. Neighborhoods are planning things. So I just want to acknowledge that, yes, that would be great. And there's got to be a way, because it's in a system or somewhere, right?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. And I was going to lift that up as well based on the discussion that Councilmember Wolf launched about access, right? And who has access. And I think it was Councilmember Bento used the word gaps, right? And so there must be I feel like that would be part of our system planning, right? The classifications piece, but also the access within that. And, I just, from my experience in Minneapolis, it became clear that really we had a structurally inequitable park system with what was defined as regional and what was defined as local, and that meant where resources went, right? And so the local parks were being starved of resources, and not necessarily because of the city's issue, but because of the dynamics between the different funding levels of government. We've had this conversation quite a bit, Councilmember Wolf, and so So I think seeing that, geographically and then demographically, who has access to what kind of parks and what kinds of programming, I think that's exactly right. And so
Mr.
if
Chair,
that's a-
again, if I may, just to that point, and I know in my community, we gauged how far away a park would be, and we planned. I mean, that was one of the most essential things that we did. And I don't know about all the other communities out there, and maybe historically it wasn't done that way, but it will be nice to see over time, again with layers, how we have tried to improve the opportunity and no further than number to get to a park. So, again, to Minneapolis is, and on the north side, I can tell you, when I lived there, right? So I just want to make that point that I think our local communities are, at least the ones I'm working on, are trying to be intentional about that. But I don't know if there's really, I don't know, we don't usually mandate things here, but if there are things that we can say your comp plan needs to, make sure that there's, at least so you know what I'm getting at. Thank you.
No, And further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we did some research a while back looking at access to regional parks, and actually, the people that live in the core have better access to regional parks than farther out. So it's not like, people in the older parts of the metro don't have equitable access to regional parks. They're very heavily used and maybe getting overused because of the desire to be there, but it's not that there's not access in the core areas to regional parks. In my remarks before, I wasn't saying that things didn't happen in the past in Minneapolis and St. Paul and some of the older communities in terms of the redlining and all of that. But to generalize that to the entire region, when so much of the region was built after 1968 when fair housing passed. I mean, I lived in Golden Valley. I was in elementary school in the early 1970s, and I started out with a very, very white school. And I remember people moving in, and I had a neighbor that was Native that I played with them all the time. I think they lived there before I did, but it was when I was small enough that I couldn't remember. But most of the people of color that were moving into my community were moving into bigger, nicer houses, not in my neighborhood. They were moving into the newer houses that were being built. And it wasn't the same sort of dynamic as what happened, during redlining and the racial covenants and all of that. And so I just want to acknowledge that painting the entire region with that brush really doesn't resonate with people because that's not their lived experience as they've watched the region become more diverse. It's been a largely respectful sort of a deal for most of my life, and I'm pretty old.
Thank you, Councilmember. And to the first point, I mean, to me, that gets to your comments earlier about the big picture, right? So we're regional, so we frame this as a regional park system, but really it's not just us. And so, and if we as the regional entity aren't figuring out how to kind of gauge that, it might be a distance thing, it might be the level of activities at a park that you have access to, but it feels like that's a missing piece to me, and it always has actually, but it's really becoming elevated in this conversation. So then that would be sort of the system plan, review, update, classifications, things like, that kind of dynamic data. Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Because this was earlier on in the presentation, and it's got nothing to do with this, well, kind of, sort of. Can I just throw it out there really fast?
Go for it.
So the other thing is, I appreciated somewhere in the presentation and the plan, there's the acknowledgement and embracing of new cultures that are here and how they want to be acting and participating and doing their festivals and religious ceremonies or what have you. So in the district I represent, it's the fastest growing Asian population in the region, and it's just booming. And there are new cultural groups that have formed, and And so I'm just trying to, also make sure that there's a lot of history here that we will acknowledge, and we are acknowledging, and we have newer people that are here, maybe second or third generation now, and the families are growing and growing. And, how do they show up so that it is everybody's place, right? And so there was reference to that, but that's just very important, at least for a lot of the part of the region that I represent, that they might not have the history here, but it is today, they want to feel, I don't know if ownership is the right word, but relationship with the place that they're in, too.
Thank you, Councilmember. Anything else? Oh, and I was just going to drop in just to your questions. I know I don't have it in front of me. And I think pretty much all my points got touched on today, but I really like the separating out the statutory piece out from everything else. Because for me, not just in parks, but probably most in parks, it's not always clear, what is statutory and what is policy, what is regional policy. So I find that to be a very useful innovation. Cool. Anything else? I apologize, Sarah, and to your team, and I'll apologize to the group as well for letting that first conversation go on so long, but it was just like such a good conversation, as has this been. So we will get to housing.
And it's good stuff.
Yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
One more thing, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No.
On the climate stuff, acknowledging what a great asset we have with having regional parks along our waterways, so when they flood, you're not flooding somebody's house. It's something that's more resilient. That's a great asset to our community.
Great, thanks. Anything to close us out, or are you getting kind of what you needed here?
I don't know, so we're helpful.
Well, all right. And the housing policy plan to come,
Will it come on May 20th? Yes.
May 20th, and so maybe we'll start with that, so we can, cool.
Thank you.
And seeing no further business before us today, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.